Morning. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Justin Senesi. I have the privilege of serving here as a pastor. And as a pastor, one of my favorite things to do is bless people, especially in sometimes formal settings. I officiated a wedding yesterday, and at the end of all the vows and the ceremonies, all the stuff, you get to pray a blessing over that new couple before you introduce them as husband and wife. When we do baby dedications and I'm able to pray a blessing over the children and then the parents, it's wonderful. It's just a wonderful thing because to me it means something. It's one of the reasons here at Hickory Ridge, every Sunday before we let you all and unleash you on an unsuspecting world, we pray a blessing over you. It's not just words. It means something. We believe it deposits something into your hearts and into your lives that you then carry with you through the week to come. So I love the whole idea of blessing. And we are in this series called Dream House, how to win at home, how to build a house, a home that will impact generations to come. And what we've looked at throughout this series is this idea that a dream house is built by breaking generational patterns of dysfunction and establishing godly patterns for future generations. So we talked about what these ungodly, dysfunctional patterns are. How do we identify them? How do we begin to find freedom from them through love and forgiving, through letting go? And then last week we began to shift a little bit and say, how do we begin to build godly patterns? How do we begin to establish something that will live into generations to come, that will touch a future that we may not be alive to see, but it will make a difference in countless generations to come. And what we learned last week was this, that there's three important things. We have to leave, we have to own, and we have to create. We have to leave the dysfunction of the past, our family of upbringing, our parents, not necessarily physically leave them, although there are times to do that. Certainly when you're married, you have to leave mom and dad's house. But you have to step away from those things. You have to leave that if you're going to start something new. Then you have to own it. You have to own some things. We all have responsibilities for where our lives are now, today. We can't blame our mom and dad, our grandparents, our great uncle for everything. We have a responsibility. And as we leave and own, it allows us to create something new, something that never existed before. And something that, again, will live to impact future generations. So this morning, what I want to do is begin to look at something that, if you do this well, it will shape generations to come. Because the opposite of dealing with the curse of sin is the blessing of obedience. And when you walk in obedience, when you begin to pass down a blessing, it impacts generations to come. You can walk in sin, and people will deal with the consequences of that. Or you can walk in obedience, and people will walk in the blessing of that. Here's what it says in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy. It's the telling of the law, the second telling of the law. It's actually the book that Jesus quoted from the most, so you should read it often. Even if you're like, I don't understand it all, it's deep, it's got a lot of richness in it. So in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is talking and he's laying out to the people what God wants for them. And here's what he says. He says, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing is if you obey. There is a blessing in obedience that you can pass down. The blessing is if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. And then he goes on and says, here's what the curse is. The curse is if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I command you today. So we can deal with the curse of sin, or we can walk in the blessing of obedience, both in our own lives and in the lives of those that are around us. Our children, our grandchildren, our parents, our grandparents, our friends, our church family. There is a way in which if we walk in obedience, a blessing is passed on. But it's not just what we do. It's in that context of sinning or obeying. There is a blessing that we can pass on through the specific things that we do. So to look at that, I want to look at these brothers that we mentioned a few weeks ago. Their names are Esau and Jacob. They're twins. Esau was born first, but just by a few minutes. They're twin brothers, but they were very different, and they had their parents whose names were Isaac and Rebekah. And we talked about just there's dysfunction there. There's a lot of tension between Esau and Jacob. One of the reasons is that the father, Isaac, he loved Esau more. It says it right in the Bible. He loved Esau more, but Rebekah loved Jacob more. So you've got this natural tension, and Jacob is kind of a conniver and a schemer. And Esau is very living in the moment. He's not thinking about the future. And there's all kind of tension that builds month after month, year after year. Now they're grown men. And their father, Isaac, is old. And he wants to bless his son, his oldest son, his favorite son, his firstborn son. And so he tells him what to do, and here's where we're going to pick up the story. It's recorded for us in the book of Genesis. It says, one day when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son. He said, "My son." "Yes, father," Esau replied. "I am an old man now," Isaac said, "and I don't know when I may die. Take your bow and a quiver full of arrows and go into the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare my favorite dish and bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die." It's a powerful moment. We don't bless our children in this context anymore, in this way anymore, but this is a powerful moment. Isaac knows his days are numbered. He doesn't know when, but he just has a sense that maybe he's about to go the way of all things. He's about to breathe his last. And so he calls his son. He says, "I want to bless you." And so Esau goes and does that. But while Esau is out hunting, Jacob, the schemer, with his mom coaching him. You got to realize. So here's Rebekah. She's standing outside the tent. She hears this. Esau goes out to hunt, and Rebekah says, "Whoa, Esau's not my favorite. Jacob's my favorite." So she calls Jacob, and she says, "Jacob, I want you to go in and trick your dad. Pretend that you're Esau so you can get the blessing." And he does it. I mean, you talk about dysfunctional patterns. Can you imagine? It's your birthday, and your mom says to your little brother, "Pretend that you're your big brother and go get all his presents." You'd be like, "What's the meaning?" And your mom's like, "No, it's fine. It's good. He deserves it. He's my favorite." So that's basically what happens. Jacob goes in and receives the blessing from his father. Now, what we would think is, what's the big deal? So his father prayed some words. He found out that Jacob tricked him. Just take it back. I mean, just say, "I renounce the blessing and I place it upon Esau." But that was not the way it worked. In those days, in that time, when a blessing was given, it was fixed. It was irrevocable. It was forever. So once Isaac said those words, it was now Jacob's. He owned it. Didn't matter how he got it. It was his. So here's what happens. It says Isaac found out that he was tricked. He began to tremble uncontrollably and said, "Then who just served me wild game? I have already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came in. And yes, that blessing must stand." It's fixed. When Esau heard his father's words, he let out a loud and bitter cry. "Oh, my father, what about me? Bless me too," he begged. And then it says that those same words a few verses later. "Oh, my father, bless me too." Can you hear the anguish in that? Can you hear the heart cry in that? And that heart cry, I believe, is the heart cry of every person who's ever born. "Father, bless me. I want to be blessed by my mom. I want to be blessed by my dad. I want to receive a blessing. I don't want to be overlooked. Don't you have anything left for me?" And I believe that's what so many of us are missing in our lives. Both receiving a blessing and knowing how to give a blessing. So in those times, I want to explain to you how a blessing was done in those times, and then begin to take some of those elements, those ingredients, and look at how we can bless our children and those in our lives. So this is how a blessing would happen. The father would place his hands on his son's head and would speak, expressing encouragement, love, and acceptance. So he would place his hands and he would speak. Dads, if there's any fathers here, please hear me. Learn to speak to your children. It is so important. The words of a father matter. He would speak expressing love and acceptance and encouragement. He would convey a message about his future and pledge to make it happen. He would sometimes it would be considered prophetic, but he would say, this is what your future holds. And it was almost as a transaction. I will help to make this come to pass. A blessing was more than words spoken. It was something given. It wasn't just empty words. That's why Isaac couldn't just say, I revoke it. I take it back. It wasn't just words spoken. It was something imparted, something given. It was huge. It was powerful. It was poignant. And it shifted and changed lives and destinies. Now, I want to say, that's how a blessing was done in the Old Testament, in biblical times. But it's not just something for a father to do. It's something that a mom can do. A mom and a dad together can bless their children. We can pass down a blessing. So that idea is found in the book of 1 Thessalonians. Paul's writing to the Christians there. And he says, we took you just as you were. We were never patronizing, never condescending, but we cared for you the way a mother cares for her children. We loved you dearly. That's the blessing that we can pass down as parents. And then he goes on from the perspective of a father. With each of you, we were like a father with his child, holding your hand, whispering encouragement, showing you step by step how to live well, to have a future before the Lord. That is the power of a blessing. So what are those ingredients that we need to begin to take into our lives so that we can be a blessing to other people? The first thing is this. When it comes to your children, but anyone, embrace them. Embrace them. There is something about the physical contact, the physical connection between people. We know this in the natural, right, with parents and children. There is something about a mother who from the moment of conception has that physical contact, that physical connection with that child. From the moment of conception until they're born, there's something there that a dad will never understand. But then as a father, the moment that child's born, we hold it and we love it and we kiss it and we do all those things that a father needs to do. It's huge, it's important, and those things shouldn't stop, by the way. As your kids get older, don't stop. Hold their hands, wrestle with them, have tickle fights, snuggle with them. Do those things as they get older and they become teenagers and they say, oh, don't put your arm around me. Put your arm around them. Don't do it in front of their friends to embarrass them all the time. But occasionally is okay. But do those things. Hold their hand when they get married and they step out on their own and they're living away from you, whether they're married or on their own independently. Hold their hand. Put your hand on their shoulder. Embrace them. There's something about a physical connection. I'll never forget the times when people have put their hand on my shoulder and looked me right in the eyes. And there's something about the physical connection, and they say something to me. I'm proud of you. I'm so thankful for you. There's something there. Have you ever seen that when someone just gently puts their hands on someone's cheeks and holds them and looks in their eyes and speaks to them? There's something deep about the physical connection. And here's why it's so important, because the same hand that can abuse can also bless. The same hand that can threaten can also protect. The same hand that can invoke some kind of damage to someone can also come alongside and say, you're safe with me. There's power in that. We should never lose that. That's why the father would put his hands on the son's head. The next thing is this. Speak encouragement, love, and acceptance. You need to speak those things. It's great to have that connection physically, but it needs to be undergirded with words of love and acceptance and encouragement. We need to do that regularly and consistently. Encourage, love, accept. So often I think we miss the power of that. But we all need to hear it. We all need to know you're accepted by me. You're loved by me. We all need to be encouraged. There's 2 times in the life of Jesus when he was here on earth when God the Father spoke from heaven in an audible voice that other people heard regarding Jesus. And both times it was at his baptism when he was baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River, and then at another time what we refer to as the transfiguration, when Jesus was revealed to his 3 closest friends for who he truly was. And both times when God spoke, these were the words that he said. This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Encouragement, I'm pleased with him. Love, I love him. Acceptance, this is my son. This is my son. It's my boy. I'm proud of him. He belongs to me. It is so important that we say those things. I love you. I believe in you. You're strong. You've got potential. I see a great future for you. I'm so proud, not of what you've done, but of who you are. Our children need to hear those words. Why? Because when you speak like that, it reinforces who they are to you, and it deepens who you are to them. And that's hugely important to build a godly pattern. Godly patterns of blessing that move down from generation to generation. They know who they are to you. You're my child, and you're safe here. And who you are to them, they can look at you and know that you will lead them and guide them in a way that's right. I remember one time I was with my son, Isaac. We were at the grocery store. We were buying some food, and we were in the meat department. Whenever I go to the grocery store, I end up in the meat department just to see if there's any sales. And so there we are, and we're going, and he's little. He's maybe about 7 years old. And I'm looking, seeing what's on sale, and as 6-7-year-olds are apt to do, he likes to poke everything that he can get his hands on. And I was not maybe being as diligent as I should, and he's in the meat case, and there's a package of ground meat, and he starts poking his finger into the ground meat. Well, eventually, you push hard enough, the plastic snaps, and it makes this cool sound. So he's doing that. And all of a sudden, as I'm putting something in the cart, this older woman, and maybe she was in her 50s, this young woman, maybe she was in her 50s. She looks at my son and she says, "You little monster, stop doing that. You're good for nothing." And I'm all of a sudden in the moment. I was off what's on sale, and I'm there. And I realized what was happening. And so my son, looks, we've always said you respect your elders, and so he just looks with these eyes that are like wide as saucers. And I turn to this woman and I say, "Ma'am, he shouldn't have done that. And I'll deal with that. But he's not a monster. He's my son. He's my son. He's not a monster. And you should never speak about any child like that." To which she muttered some obscenity and shuffled off. But I know he heard those words, both from her and from me. And what he heard from me was the antidote from what he would have heard from her, because it reinforced who he is to me and who I am to him. And he says, "You know what? People can say all kind of things, but my dad says I'm important. My dad says I'm his son. My mom says I love you. My mom says you're safe here." Those things matter. We need to say those things to our kids regularly and consistently and over and over again. See, children need to hear those words early and often. early and often. When it comes to your kids, don't just tell them you're beautiful. Tell them you're wise. Don't just tell your children you did a good job. Tell them I'm proud of who you are. Don't just tell them you're going to be a success one day. Yes, you want them to be a success. Tell them you're going to do great things for the Lord. But they need to hear those things regularly, consistently, and often. And here's the thing. They don't just need to hear it from mom and dad. You may say, I don't have kids. You can still be a voice. They need to hear it from coaches and teachers and leaders in their lives. They need to hear it from people here at this church. We need to hear it from each other. Even if you're not a child, you need to hear it. You need to hear it regularly, consistently. You need to hear it early and often. I remember hearing a story of a teenager. He was in high school, and he had a large, it took up about a third of his face birthmark. And it was remarkable, not that he had this birthmark, but how well adjusted he seemed to be. He had plenty of self-confidence. He didn't seem to bother him at all. He was well liked. He had a lot of friends. And someone asked him one time, doesn't your birthmark bother you? Doesn't it just make you feel bad about yourself? He stopped and he said, no. Not at all. When I was young, really little, like 2, 3 years old, my mom and dad would tell me over and over and over again, that mark on your face is where Jesus reached down and blessed you. And it's there as a reminder that not only you're blessed, but it helps us find you in a crowd. We can always find you. We can always know where you are. He said, I heard that so often and so regularly from such a young age that as I got into elementary school, I actually felt bad for the other kids. That's someone whose parents have spoken encouragement, love, and acceptance. And that's a blessing that will live on. Here's the next thing. Help make their future happen. Help make their future happen. All of us in this room right now, I don't care how old you are, all of us can point to things in our life that we struggle with because of what happened in the past, because of maybe what our parents did in the past. But we can also point to things that we have found success in, that we have grown in, that are going well because of what has happened in our past. See, when it comes to your children, when it comes to other people, when it comes to those that will come after you, their life is an extension of yours. Their life is an extension of yours. Just like your life is an extension of your parents, for good or for bad, your children's lives, your grandchildren's lives, those people that you influence, their life is an extension of yours. And so what we need to do is we need to learn to think generationally. Don't just think about today. Don't just think about tomorrow. Don't just think about weeks and months or even years. Think generationally. Because here's one of the things that's so powerful if you learn this. Their future is more valuable than your present. We miss that all the time. We think that what's happening here now is the most important reality, but other people's future, their future, the generations to come, is more important than your present. You know who learns this or who seems to learn it? The people that I talk to, those that are fortunate enough to live into their 80s and 90s and into their early 100s. All of a sudden, they're like, the reality of today isn't as important as what's going to live after me. Now, they live in the moment because they think I don't have a lot more moments to come. But at the same time, they go, it's what's going to live after me that's so much more important. But when you're raising your kids, you can lose that. But the future is more important than your present. And lest you think I'm just making that up, that is one of the entire points that Jesus constantly preached. Here's one of the things he says. He's talking to this guy who wants to inherit eternal life. He's a rich guy, and Jesus says, what do you think is important? And he lists all these things, and Jesus says, that's really good. But you're lacking one thing, and this is what he tells him to do. He says, sell everything you have. Don't think about the present. Sell everything you have. It's not about today. Sell everything you have. Give it away, and you will have treasure in heaven. The future is more important than the present. The future is more important than the present. Think about Abraham. If you remember the story, Abraham has this son Isaac, who we talked about earlier. It's the son of promise. If Abraham only thought about his present, he would have never said, God, if you want me to sacrifice my son, I'll do that. But because he thought about generations to come, he said, God, I'll do whatever you ask. I'll trust you that what you promised will come to pass. We have to think generationally. But when you're, especially, now listen to me, if you're raising kids, if you have children at home right now, or they're maybe just into young adulthood, here's what happens, that you can spend so much time trying to secure your future that you end up sacrificing your children's. You think about your future, but you forget about your children's future. We see this with the federal government. We need this now, today. With all the debt, that's all right. Our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, right now it's probably like 18 generations from now. They'll figure out how to dig out from the mess because it's so huge. But that's what we do. We sacrifice our children's future for our own momentary and short-term future. We need to think generationally. Because here's what is so powerful about making their future happen, is this. Their future is your future. Their future is your future. That's so much of what is ingrained in the Jewish mindset. It's the Jewish culture has understood this for centuries. And it was never just about mom and dad and then the next generation. It was 3, 4, 5 generations to come. Their future is your future. Their future is your future. Now, please hear me. This does not mean giving your little darlings everything they want, whenever they want it, however they want it. That's not the future you want. It's not meaning making sure that their future is so important they're a part of every sports team, every club, every activity. They can't miss out on anything. I have news for you. Please hear me. If you think your child is going to make it big in sports, you're probably wrong. Like, you're almost better off to go buy the Powerball ticket. It's phenomenally small. It's not about sacrificing your family to chase after a dream of what you think they will do with their life. It's about saying, I want to make sure what you become, who you become, the person that you grow into is shaped by me, by your mom, by your dad. See, their future is about who they will become, not what they will become, not what they will accomplish. But make their future happen. Embrace them. Speak to them. And the last thing is this. Give them something. Give them something. Give them something that they can use in the life to come, in their life to come. I'm not talking about in heaven, I mean here on earth. That can be material things. It can be an inheritance. It could be something you pass on that's got tangible value. Those things are important. They can be important. They're not the most important, but they are important. Here's what it says in the book of Proverbs. It says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, generations to come. Give them something. Because when you speak a blessing, when you bless people, it's not just words. It is something you're giving them. But there are things that are more valuable than just tangible goods, than just material possessions. Here's what it also says in the book of Proverbs. A good name is more desirable than great riches. It's to be esteemed is better than silver or gold. You can pass on an inheritance, possessions, but you can also pass on a godly inheritance. People spoke well of you. People spoke well of your parents. Someone's now that grandchild or that great-grandchild, and they go, oh man, I knew your granddad. I knew your dad. They were wonderful. They were just such an encouragement. I knew your mom. She was such a godly woman. She was a woman of integrity. She was a woman of grace, kind and comforting. Those things you can pass on, but give them something. Give them something, because when you pass on a blessing, words give purpose, words give meaning, words give direction. A blessing gives confidence. When you bless, it gives them something. It gives them an understanding of where they've come from and where they're going. A blessing gives something to them. It's hugely important. Now again, to those of you who might say, well, I don't have children, I don't have grandchildren. Here's the wonderful thing. Be the grandparent that you wish you had had. Be the parent that you wish you had had. There are so many kids that need that. Be the friend that you wish you had had. We can bless each other. You don't need to have a close family. You don't need to be married. You don't need to have children in order to pass on a blessing. We can all do that. One of the greatest joys for me is having a guy like Andy Salino and his wife Suzanne. My wife Jamie and Suzanne have known each other since the 3rd grade. And I've known Andy since he and Suzanne started dating, and Jamie and I started dating about the same time. It's now over 25 years. And it's exciting to me that my children, when they refer to Suzanne and Andy, it's Uncle Andy and Aunt Suzanne. They're not their aunt and uncle, but they might as well be. There's something about that close relationship, and you can find that. You can have that. It doesn't have to take 25 years. You can just develop that, and then you can be a blessing to other people. And they're such a blessing to my children, and vice versa. I believe Jamie and I are a blessing to their kids. But those things can happen. See, it's so important because we all need to receive a blessing, and we all need to give a blessing. We all need to receive a blessing, and we all need to give a blessing. You can still, I don't care how old you are, you still need to receive a blessing. And I don't care what your stage of life is, you can give a blessing. Henry Nouwen was a Catholic priest. At 54 years old, he began to pastor a community of people with special needs in Toronto, Canada. And he did that for 10 years until he died unexpectedly. He wrote that it was the best 10 years of his life. He shares about one instance that had just been so poignant to him. He said it was a seemingly normal day. They had a prayer service scheduled for that evening, and in the middle of the afternoon, this one young lady, Janet, came to him and said, "Henry, can you bless me?" Henry, being a Catholic priest, began to make the sign of the cross on her forehead and prayed a blessing. It was kind of just a rote response. And she said, "No, not that. I want a real blessing." Henry said, "Janet, why don't we talk about this at the prayer meeting tonight?" She said, "Okay." And as she walked off, he thought, I have no idea what she wants. And I have no idea what I'm going to say. But I've bought myself about 4 hours. The evening service rolls around, and it's complete, and there's about 30 or so people lingering, sitting in chairs, some on the floor, just communicating, just being in community with each other. At that point, Henry kind of pauses and says, "Earlier today, Janet asked me for a blessing." As he's still speaking, Janet stands up and rushes to stand in front of Henry. He still had no idea what he was going to say or what he was going to do. Henry says, "Well," and in a moment, she reaches out, she wraps her arms around him and buries her head into his chest. His natural reaction is to put his arms around her, to hold his hand on her head. And he just began to whisper in her ear, "Janet, you are loved by God. You are his special child. He loves you. He cares about you. And in you, we see love and grace, kindness and tenderness, the way you treat everyone here in this community, the affection that you have. Don't ever forget that you're loved by God, you're loved by me, and you're loved by everyone here." As he finishes saying that, she steps back, looks with tears in her eyes, and says, "Thank you." As she turns to walk away, Jane, who's sitting down there, raises her hand and says, "I want a blessing too." She steps up and runs, and before Henry knows what to do, she's wrapped her arms around him, buried her head in his chest, and he prays a blessing over her. One by one, everyone in that room came forward, said, "I want a blessing, I want a blessing, I want a blessing." And then Henry wrote in his journal, he said, what shocked me more than anything was when my 24-year-old assistant, a college student who was there to serve everyone living in that community, put his hand up and said, Henry, I want a blessing too. I want a blessing too. See, we all need to receive a blessing, and we all need to give a blessing. I have a feeling if any of us were in that room that day, we would have raised our hand and said, I want a blessing. There's something powerful that we can pass down to those in our lives. Don't ever forget this. A blessing can change someone's life. A blessing can change someone's life. A blessing can change your marriage. A blessing can change your home. A blessing can change your family. A blessing can change the course of your life. A blessing can change how you interact with other people. A blessing tears down dysfunctional patterns and establishes godly patterns.